Hi, my name is Rachel Vidito, and I will be presenting this case study presentation. The name of the client has been changed, and so has some identifying information to protect confidentiality and HIPAA requirements. This is for the course SBCE 691, Section 810. So client description, this client, his name is Josh. He is a male, 6 years old, currently receiving 20 hours of group ABA therapy in an environment that mimics a preschool classroom with 4 other peers who also attend group therapy. He attends school for 20 hours a week in a general education setting. He has received a diagnosis of ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. He was diagnosed at the age of 2 and has received ABA services for 4 years and speech and occupational services for the last 2 years. The target behavior in this case study is tantrum, which is defined as any occurrence of crying paired with dropping to the floor, pounding fist on a surface with moderate force, screaming, or throwing items. So assessments that were used in this case study were direct and both indirect procedures. For indirect, I used the problem identification interview. I interviewed Joshua's mother, and we discussed triggering events, possible maintaining consequences, and topography of the behavior. His mother informed me that triggering events were sharing with his siblings, denied access to preferred items such as control over the TV, the shared family iPad, toys, and also escape. So escape to aversive events. Topography of the behavior, she informed me that it was of high magnitude. Typically, it was very rare that it was low magnitude. It usually included property destruction, never aggression. Property destruction could look like throwing items or pounding his fist on surfaces. It was always accompanied by crying and sometimes accompanied by flopping or dropping. The direct ABC data collection was taken by myself, 12 to 2 p.m. in the group setting on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 2 to 4 p.m. in the group setting Tuesday, Thursday. I set it up that way so that I could observe all elements and environments within the classroom, so all of the lessons, different teachers or outpatient therapists who would come in and lead the group. And it was taken across 5 days, Monday through Friday. Negative and positive reinforcement, that was maintaining Joshua's tantrum behavior. I used the diagnostic codes to kind of break these up, taken from Sapani's Functional Behavioral Assessment book, published in 2017. These diagnostic codes are used to identify the environmental factors that are possibly maintaining the behavior. So SME, which is socially mediated escape 4.1, escape from aversive or unpleasant stimuli. Socially mediated escape 4.3, which is escape from difficult work tasks. SMA 2.3, which is socially mediated access to tangibles. Negative reinforcement examples for Josh were escaping from unpleasant peer interaction, such as sharing, or whenever a peer would like it to go first in a group activity. Negative reinforcement, escaping from difficult work tasks, such as cutting and pasting, academic worksheets. And positive reinforcement examples, access to tangibles, for example, a toy being played with by a peer, he might engage in tantrum behavior to access that toy. The intervention that was put in place was FCT, or functional communication training. This is a DR procedure. For data tracking, I did duration and frequency on the tantrum behavior. Since this was the targeted behavior, I wanted to identify if the intervention was decreasing the duration as well as the frequency, as we were seeing quite high durations as long as 30 minutes, and also frequency, we were seeing up to 5 tantrums in a session. Percentage of opportunities for the FCT responses were also recorded using our data tracking platform, Central Reach. We would use a check or an X depending on if Josh engaged in the appropriate FCT response as opposed to the maladaptive behavior. So he would get a check for saying, I need help in a situation that he wanted to escape instead of engaging in the tantrum behavior. Typically, there are 3 stages of FCT interventions, and these were used with Josh as well. The first is the use of an assessment to identify the environmental events or conditions that serve as reinforcers for problem behavior. In this case, we used the ABC data sheet and the interview. And then a socially acceptable communication response is taught to replace that maladaptive behavior. In this case, we were teaching I need a break in place of engaging in tantrum behavior. And we stopped reinforcing the tantrum behavior and only began differentially reinforcing the appropriate responses. Finally, the behavior is generalized by teaching across people and settings. We will discuss this later on in the slides. Some important considerations for FCT are the communication response may require shaping. Replacement behaviors must require less effort, which we ensured that ours did. Prompts need to be faded, and reinforcement should be thinned and eventually faded to the natural reinforcement for their response, so getting a break. Problem behavior may return if the reinforcement is thinned too quickly. Motivating operations relevant to this intervention and to Joshua's tantrum behavior. There were several establishing operations that were identified during the direct observation interview. And these were important because EOs were contrived throughout this case study to teach replacement responses. So some of the EOs identified were difficult work tasks such as cutting and pasting, academic worksheets, answering questions after reading passages, and being asked to look for items in the classroom. Other EOs included turn-taking activities such as board games and taking turns being line leader or sharing toys. And also different instructors served as EOs, so changes in RBTs or substitute teachers. The primary abolishing operations were free time or absence of peers in the classroom. Obviously, when these environmental factors were at play, there wasn't a lot of need to engage in tantrum behavior to gain access to items or escape from tasks. Reinforcement procedures that were put in place. FCT requires an FR of 1 to begin. You are reinforcing every appropriate response in place of the maladaptive behavior. So we used a fixed ratio of 1. So for example, every time Josh said I wanted a break, he was provided with that break immediately. Reinforcement must be thinned with FCT, so a time delay was gradually increased between his response and the reinforcement. Initially, we began with 5 seconds to 30 seconds and then slowly increased to 1 to 3 minutes. And once those delays were being reliably tolerated, we were able to increase to 10 minutes before we switched to a VR of 3 or a variable ratio of 3. This means that some of his FCT communication responses were not being reinforced with the break while others were, to mimic the natural reinforcement within environments. So in school or at home, obviously not every manned for escape can be honored. In an ideal world, we could. So that was our end goal, was for reinforcement to be given on a variable schedule, and we achieved that. Responses, we taught generalization and maintenance by teaching one phrase initially and then more over time, reinforcing those variations of the responses, removing reinforcement for the maladaptive behavior, thinning the reinforcement schedule, and fading prompts quickly. We also taught across people and settings. The clinical, school, home, and community were just a few of the settings we taught across. Obstacles and outcomes. So a few of the obstacles: removing reinforcement for tantrum behavior in the group environment can be quite difficult when you want to maintain safety of all clients and client dignity. Reemergence of the problem behavior after thinning reinforcement too quickly was something that we came up against. Modifications that were made: we rethickened the reinforcement, increased the delays at a slower pace, provided non-contingent access to adult attention prior to EOs, and pre-corrections prior to EOs. Outcomes: the tantrums were significantly reduced, both duration and frequency. Communication increased with both peers and adults. Independently asking to use the classroom calm space and independently utilizing those break responses or escape responses. Improved sibling interactions at home were reported by parents, which was fabulous. And caregivers also reported less time needed to de-escalate behaviors, which was a great achievement because we wanted to improve client safety and also just his relationship with parents and siblings. That was a primary goal of ours, and I really felt like we achieved that by allowing them less time to de-escalate those behaviors and also improved communication among all members of the family. Here are my references. Thank you for joining me for this case study overview.